to the Citizens Reporter. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longree. Thank you for tuning in. The Citizens Reporter is brought to you weekly, and we are a news program focusing on around the metro area and the city of Maplewood. Now, Mr. Mark Bradley, who's usually on the program, he is on vacation, but I have with me Mr. Joseph Waters, who is going to be helping with our report this evening. Now, previously on Local News Report, we were reporting on the tax increment financing plans and schemes for the Gladstone neighborhood in the city of Maplewood. And we had promised viewers that we would continue and conclude that report on this week's Citizens Reporter. And so here we are to finish that report. Now, to bring you up to speed, with this particular tax increment financing plan, it's pretty comprehensive. It started actually a number of years ago when Sherman and Associates came to the city of Maplewood and asked the council to provide tax increment financing for the redevelopment of the northwest corner of the intersection of Frost and English. At that time, they proposed that they would be doing phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and that the liquor store that was also located at that quadrant of that intersection, that they would not need to disturb that business, buy that property, or have it included in that tax increment financing district. Well, of course, now, today, in order to do phase 3 and to complete phase 3 within the time constraints that are required under the tax increment financing statutes under state law, they are now coming to the council saying, we need tax increment financing support, we need more than what we asked for before, than what we indicated that we would need rather, and that we need a forgivable loan potentially of $600,000. We need to buy out that liquor store in order to make the project work. And so we have a clip to bring you up to speed on what the financial risks are to the city of Maplewood with this big proposal.
Then the proposed loan would be from some other city source. So $600,000 from some other city source. We thought as going through this process, well, would there be some TIF available? Could we pool to make this loan? But through this analysis of all these districts, there isn't any TIF available as a source to be able to make this loan. And one of the things we tell every city contemplating, and there are several that have contemplated and entered into loans like this, is that you need to be comfortable that you might not ever get it back. And the numbers right now show that you may well, and you very well could get it back, but I never want to stand up here and say, don't worry about it, you'll get your money back, because you just need to know that that may not happen. So.
Now, Mr. Waters, recall that when we were reporting on this last, that the city attorney had indicated that this is a risky situation for the city council to undertake, that this type of tax increment financing plan, which incorporates this type of loan, is also a little unusual.
Yes, I do recall that, and there should have been pause by the city attorney saying you need to really think about this and do a deeper dive into the financials to see if you really want to take on this type of risk.
And what I'm concerned about when now Sherman and Associates is coming to the council and saying we need to buy out the liquor store owner, that the council is not asking that question of, well, how much are you paying to buy that business out?
Well, the question I have too, and I do remember when Sherman Associates first proposed this project a number of years ago, they did approach the liquor store, and the liquor store owner, they wanted the liquor store to be part of their development, and the liquor store owner, as I recall, the representative from Sherman and Associates was saying that the liquor store owner either said, either buy us out or we don't want to be part of this project at all. I'd be curious to find out why the liquor store owner changed. Maybe it was 10 years ago when the liquor store owner said that. And I understand as time goes on, things change, but what made this person change? And like you said, what are you paying for? Are you buying out the liquor store? Or are you buying out the property? Because
Right.
those generally, and you've been in the real estate, and from what I understand, you've got generally in today's market, you've got the property and you've got the business. So my question is, what are you buying? Are you buying just the property and the business is going elsewhere? Or are you buying both the property and the business, and then the business essentially shuts down, so it's part of this development?
Right, and see, and that's something that this council is not asking. They're not asking, are we only looking at you purchasing the property and the costs associated with that? Or, like you indicated, also buying out the business, because there's the goodwill, all the customer base. There's a whole lot of things that when you buy a business, that business, you would buy that business, but then the business itself could relocate maybe somewhere else in Maplewood.
Correct, exactly.
You see, and so that is a question that hasn't been answered. And if Sherman and Associates is willing to pay 25% over what the market value is for that real estate, this city council isn't even going to blink at that, because they have already given that policy directive to the city manager of Maplewood, that when Maplewood is buying real estate for land speculation and for redevelopment or whatever it is that they want land for, that she has the authority to spend up to 25% over the market value. So why would they begrudge that to Sherman and Associates if that's what he needed to do in order to buy out the liquor store?
No, of course not. They, to me, they just want the issue, and they could care less about the financial details to get that issue. They want to be able to run this saying, look, we brought affordable housing to Maplewood. For all you folks that are looking for affordable housing, look what we've done for you.
And they want to look good in the eyes of Ramsey County and the Ramsey County Rail Authority, because as we have shown on these programs in the past, we have film footage that states that the density of the Gladstone neighborhood was changed specifically to support the county's investment in the bus rapid transit.
It's interesting, very interesting.
So let's continue where we left off, as the city council in their workshop, this is at the in June rather, where they're discussing at the workshop this proposal of Sherman and Associates and the TIF districts being proposed in that intersection of Frost and English.
The Frost English Village Phase 3 analysis, that slide, having to do with the acquisition of the liquor store. I see Shane from Sherman and Associates is sitting here. Did you want to address anything with the council?
Mayor, members of the council, I'm Shane LaFave with Sherman Associates. Thank you for having me here. It's good to be back. We've been talking about this Phase 3 really since the beginning, planning for it, even in the development agreement when we were working on Phase 1. And so this is something that we would like to see happen, just to kind of close out that whole development. We've been envisioning this as part of the new construction that we've been doing. We want to kind of finish out that block with more new construction.
They want to close it out because the time of this TIF district, in order to have new additional charges be part of the TIF district for reimbursement under the tax increment financing, is coming to a close. They only have approximately 1 year left of that window of time. So of course they want to finish the building so that they can get that included in this tax increment financing district. If they miss the window of time, then that development might not get done, or they're going to actually have to do it on their own dime. Imagine that.
Shocking, shocking. The capital markets, how scary can that be? You actually have to pay market rates.
Oh, yes. So let's continue with our film footage.
As Jason mentioned, part of the reason for the ask here is because we're having to acquire a not only land and building, but also a business, an existing operating liquor store, which definitely adds to the cost and was not something we had to do in the initial phases. We had land and a vacated bowling alley, which we were acquiring originally. And so that there's definitely a premium when you have an operator operating a business, and she wants to receive, obviously, compensation for that operating business and her no longer owning it. So that has been part of the ask.
So we heard part of the answer there. There is a premium for acquiring this business.
Yes.
A premium.
Exactly.
That's code words for above market value.
Yes, we're actually, no, as far as I'm concerned, it's code words meaning we're going to have to spend more money than we put in our slide. We're going to have to spend a little bit more. Maybe a couple million more.
Yes, that's right. So here we are. We've got the developer coming to the city council, hat in hand, saying, well, you know, since you're our partner, in order to make this work, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to support us with tax increment financing and that special out of the ordinary loan that is going to give us the money, the gap, to fill that gap between what we can do and the extra money we're going to have to shell out at a premium to buy out the liquor store.
Cha-ching.
Cha-ching, there you go. Let's continue.
I want to add on the 600,000 cash flow note. You know, the way that it would
Okay,
work
let's get the film, let's start the film footage at the beginning. Okay, and then make sure we flip to the film footage.
On the 600,000 cash flow note. You know, the way that it would work is we would pledge a portion, usually it's 25% or somewhere in that range of ongoing cash proceeds would go towards repayment of that note, and then there would be a balloon balance after 15 years or whatever amount of term that we set where that note is due, no matter what the cash flow of the property has been. You know, that is something where we would be willing to do a second mortgage, assuming our lender is fine with that. They probably would be, and we would provide a guarantee as a developer. That loan, certainly, although I would agree, it comes with risk. There's also risk to us in not repaying that loan. If we don't repay that loan, we're reporting that to every other lender on every other project that we do going forward. You know, we've been doing this for 40 years, and we like to repay our debts because it allows us to keep doing the next deal. Certainly, every lender asks us, have you had any loans where you haven't repaid? And so we have to report that information all the time. And so as much as, yes, technically there's a risk, you know, it's very much in our interest to repay that loan for this project's sake and for future projects' sake.
Well, certainly much of what he says there is probably very accurate. I mean, if you've been in business for 40 years, you probably have a certain track record, and maybe they haven't, you know, defaulted on various loans. We don't know. We haven't done a credit report on them. But there's still these issues that the council should be discussing. So rather than just taking the assurances of the developer, they should be asking the questions, so that way they know that they have done their due diligence on behalf of the taxpayer. Now, what I have seen in some instances when a developer is looking for collateral for a particular project because, say, for instance, a lender doesn't want to be the second fiddle, so to speak, in the transaction, is that they will actually ask for different collateral. And so there might be this lending, this loan, but then they could use different collateral. They don't actually have to use the collateral that is the land. They might have something else that is valuable that could be liquidated in order to make good on the loan if they default.
One quick question, because you talk about other collateral, because generally when you think of a real estate loan, you think of the building, the land in the building as its main collateral, because it's something you just can't up and move. They've got something in retail called factoring. For instance, if you bring in $10,000 a month and you borrow against that inventory, you may get $9,500, and then that $500 is used as a fee, or that's repaid to the lender. Do they have anything like that in real estate where they may say, okay, if you're looking at $10,000 in monthly income from your rents, to help mitigate our risk, we get a portion of that?
Well, that is a good example. Actually, in real estate, there are instances where the lender will say, we get a certain, that if you go into default, we automatically get a certain percentage of the rents that are collected each month.
Okay.
Yes, there are certain things like that. You can set that up. It's an agreement by the parties. It's binding. And the other issue that I was listening to when he was talking about how this would be structured is that he was saying how the repayment would be maybe 25%, what he was saying, annually or upfront or something like that. But then the city has to wait for 15 years for a balloon payment. Again, what is the collateral for that balloon payment being made? Is interest accruing during this whole entire time? I would think so.
Well, I hope so.
However, again, the council doesn't ask on this note what would be the typical interest rate that would be charged. They don't ask that. Why don't they ask that?
Good question.
Because they certainly bring that question up every time they have special assessments, and they tell the residents who are being assessed a special assessment for their road that if you don't pay us up front for this assessment, cash in full, and you pay for it over 15 years, this is the interest rate you're going to pay. So when it comes to the taxpayers and their special assessments, the city is right there asking and telling the residents what the interest rate is going to be. But yet when it comes to Sherman and Associates and their note, which is, by the way, going to be a balloon note, they don't bring up the question.
They don't want to jeopardize the deal. That's how I'm looking at it.
That's right. We'll just negotiate that interest later.
That's right.
That's right. Well, and I'm wondering too whether or not they're going to charge them a lesser interest rate than they charge the residents who are assessed special assessments for their streets.
Oh, come on now. Special favors for a developer? Please, please.
Well, that's something we'll have to keep our ears open and try to hear what there is to be heard when it comes to what interest rate they're going to charge Sherman and Associate on that note as compared to what they charge residents when they assess them special assessments. Well, let's continue with our next clip.
This has been a conversation that has had some complication, with the liquor store owner, is trying to say, are we going to buy your business? Or I know that she at one point listed her business for sale to the open market, and that potential new owner would have then leased space from us in the new building. And so we want to get this going, but it's a lot of chicken and egg and balancing, because then there's other components of, we've been out to the market saying, hey, we want to build a new space here. Are you interested in leasing? And we've had a number of folks come to us and say, we are interested. When are you opening? Well, we're trying to figure that out. And so we know that there's interest out there, but it's kind of, we might have to, if you build it, they will come sort of a scenario. And so we're trying to just find a way to get this built, to close out that block.
That is one phrase that I just absolutely do not think has any place in government. Build it and they will come. You know how many times we hear that? They build things and nobody comes.
Yes.
And that is always the rationale for many developments that we've seen throughout the metro area, particularly some of these trendy things where they thought they were going to have all the businesses on the bottom and then the housing units on the second, third, and fourth story. And many of those particular developments, they took forever and ever for anybody to fill them at all. And some of them are still vacant today. And I think his other comment that he made with regard to how these have been ongoing discussions, and he talked about how people, businesses supposedly are coming to them and saying, when are you going to open? And that's their question. I would think that their question, most likely being the first question, would be, what is the square footage what are you going to charge per square footage in your new building? Because there's a lot of spaces in Maplewood where these same businesses could enter into, where they know what that cost per square foot is today. And if the building that Sherman and Associates is putting up is not commensurate with what is in the marketplace in Maplewood, and also considering this is not off of a transportation corridor.
Well, that was my point, that as I was listening to you, that was where I was looking at. If I'm a business, I'm gonna look at, can my customers find me? If this is if this is gonna be another retail store, this, in my opinion, is not the best place for a retail store. There's no you don't have the foot traffic, or I'll just say the foot traffic to justify the business. The foot traffic would be up by the mall or somewhere else off of a main artery. This is far from a main artery itself. Yes, square footage and what you're paying per square foot is important, and of course in retail, as you probably know, not only are they paying per square foot, but they used to pay by gross sales. Mm-hmm. And my thought when he said, yes, we're interested, my perception is they're saying, we're interested now or 6 months down the line, not a potential year, 2 years down the line, because no telling what condition, the market condition could be a year or two down the line. So when I hear they're saying that you have interest, you have people that are interested today or 3 or 4 months down the line, not potentially 2 years down the line, particularly if they don't get the financing, as you talked about last week, from where they're going to get the financing
right.
from.
And of course, the other complication in this particular area right here, when you're looking at retail, in addition to the issue of transportation and the cost per square footage and that foot traffic, is that if you have predominantly the housing complexes that are being constructed are all income verified housing voucher program participants,
they're not going to have the money, the extra money to be spending at your establishments.
That's exactly right. That discretionary income is
That's the
just
word I
not
was
going to
looking
be
for.
there. Yeah, the discretionary income is just not going to be there. They are concerned about making sure that they've got the school supplies for their kids, that they've got food on the table, that they're paying their utilities, they got gas for the car, they got to get to work. Oh, they're going to use that bus rapid transit.
What's wrong with you? You're not
Except
driving
that
the car.
all the jobs, the good paying sustainable jobs, of which there are plentiful of, are all some other part of the metro.
Where you need a car to get to them.
Yep, okay. Well, build it and they will come. Okay. Well, let's continue.
Just a couple of comments, and this is maybe for the benefit of our two newest council members. I've had the privilege of having you present numerous times, and I was here for the first 2 phases of Frost English and voted in favor of it. Can you tell, for the benefit of other council members, what else have you developed in our city that might be helpful for them as well?
In your city specifically, I don't know that we've done anything other than those 2 buildings.
Whoops.
Oopsie.
As a skilled litigator, appointed Mayor Marley Abrams should know the first rule of being an attorney.
Is you better know the answer before you ask the question.
Yep, that was a foot in mouth episode. Whoops. But let's see how the representative from Sherman and Associates is able to save that one for her.
And stuff around town in the greater metro area, and have a number of things that we've done and are ongoing and have planned in the metro area. But I don't think in Maplewood proper that we've done anything else. We would certainly like to, and had a really good experience with the first two, and would like to do more. But this, I will say that this specific product, an 8,000 square foot retail building, is not, primarily what we do. We don't have a whole horde of 8,000 square foot retail buildings around the metro area. But it's really important to us for the housing to be successful and for the greater neighborhood to be successful. And we think it really adds to the aesthetic. There's an incredible amount of traffic on Frost there and English both, who see this corner and see this building every single day. Literally, it's thousands of people every day.
An incredible amount of traffic, and yet this is exactly the streets, Frost and English, that they narrowed them specifically because why? Who knows? Because it's that new model, that new trend of smart streets. And yet there's an incredible amount of traffic on narrower streets. So you see, the reality and the trends don't match up.
Well, my question that I have there, this is their preferred developer, correct?
That's pretty much what they've said in their closed meeting.
You would think that since this is their preferred developer, that they would have, for the benefit of the new council members, a portfolio showing them what their projects are. Not only what they did in Maplewood, which is a big fat goose egg, other than this one at Frost and English, but they would have some sort of brochure or some sort of outline showing what the projects they have done throughout the metro area. Now, if they haven't done a lot of commercial, they need to say that. We primarily focus in on residential. We primarily focus in on housing. We do very little commercial. We've done some, and this is the successes that we've had with it. We've done a lot in housing. This is the successes that we've had, and these are also our failures. Most people that are presenting themselves, when you start to get in depth, aren't afraid to tell you what their failures are, because to show you that they're only human. That, you know what, even with the best intentions of our projects, there are some that just don't make it, or maybe they were too soon for their time.
Right.
So if you want to have something for the benefit of your new council members, there should have been, staff should have put together some information that says X, Y, and Z.
Right. But I think Sherman and Associates probably was clued in by the city staff that the new appointed council members, 2 of them, were issued big red rubber stamps that say approved. Because we were friends of the council and that's why we're here. So I think they already understood that the big approval stamp was already been issued to them.
Don't worry, make your spiel, it's just for the public, but you pretty much have gotten this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly. Well, let's continue.
Inclination for the current owner of the liquor store that they may want to move into a new retail space, that if you were to go forward with this project?
So I've met with the liquor store owner many times. We've had kind of an ongoing relationship over 3 or 4 years of random lunches. But her desire really is to retire, in all honesty, and to kind of move on and do something else in life. And so she doesn't really have a lot of interest in kind of starting over in a new building, in a new situation. She likes being an owner, likes owning her building and doing her own thing. Being a tenant isn't that attractive to her. As part of potentially selling this to another owner, the idea was that person would maybe rent from us. And so if that all came together, that would be great. We would be open to that. We'd love to have a liquor store in a new building. I think there's a strong local following for that store. But I don't think she personally is looking to kind of start over in a new building and keep going. If she's going to keep her operation going, she'd rather just stay in her current building.
Now, this issue has come up before previously, back in 2004 and 5, when then Assistant City Manager Melinda Coleman was busy promoting how all the businesses there in the Gladstone neighborhood could just sell their properties to developers and then move into these brand new buildings as a tenant, paying rent. And every single one of those business owners said, hit the pavement. We have our own buildings. We don't want to move into somebody else's. We don't want to pay rent. And what I also heard in this clip, he's indicating how that liquor store owner is saying she'd like to retire. Okay, well that sounds well and good. But you see where her liquor store is and where the new liquor store potentially would be in the new development, there is a conflict between that and the city ordinance with the spacing between liquor stores. Because you see, there's already another liquor store in the Gladstone community over across the way, about 2 blocks down on Frost Avenue. And so when the old liquor store that they're buying out suddenly is no longer there, is the city council going to grandfather in the brand new liquor store that moves so that they get the same grandfather rights as the liquor store that's being torn down, even though they're in different properties?
I think that's one of the things that the owner would look at, saying, you know what, I want some guarantees. You know, because as I listen to this, again, this is kind of my analysis. You don't have that many liquor stores out there simply because, you know, we're cracking down on people with alcohol, the taxes. They're working with they're working with a tight margin in the first place. That's probably why she wants to own her own building, because it's probably paid for. She knows what her costs to do businesses are, or to do business is, and that's an unknown variable moving into a new property, because you can bet it's going to cost her more to move into a new property. And if she's working with a razor-thin margin to begin with, that margin can very easily be wiped out.
Right, and so she would actually have to cut into the proceeds from the sale of her property in order to pay her rent.
And that would defeat her purposes of retiring to begin with. That's probably her retirement nest egg.
Absolutely, absolutely. And see, the reason I bring up this question about is the city council going to be put in that position of allowing a new liquor store owner in a new liquor store location that is in conflict with their ordinance as to how close liquor stores can be, because that new one rightfully would not be allowed to be there in that new building under the city ordinance. But is this council going to be put in that position to look the other way with the ordinance? Oh, you know, they did that with the ordinance that required a special election. Mm-hmm. They got rid of that.
Yes.
So they could they could just do away with this ordinance. But you see, Ms. Kathleen Juniman is so anti-alcohol. Is she going to say, oh, it's okay to have 2 liquor stores really close together? Just in the spirit of cooperation with Sherman and Associates?
Who knows? I'd like to be part of that or hear that conversation. I really would love to hear that conversation. But yeah, you make up a good point. And then if you give a special exemption to them, who else is down the line?
Right.
That could potentially want a special exemption because of a project being redeveloped.
Exactly.
So when you just basically open up that Pandora's box where you may just be going down a hole that you may never be able to dig yourself out of.
Yes. Well, let's continue.
You know, at this point, I think, council members, I'd like to ask you to weigh in and at least give a little direction on, you know, concluding this phase 3. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I think certainly that's why you're here, I think, maybe to at least hear what we are thinking. Councilmember Juniman.
Oh, goody, I get to go first.
Now, at a workshop, the city council does not take a vote. So this, in essence, is like taking a vote, because they have it on the consent agenda where they're not going to discuss it. And so you don't even know that that's what they're voting on. But here we're going to hear how each of these council members feel about this whole Sherman and Associates proposal for Phase 3 for tax increment financing for the $600,000 special circumstances loan and the whole kit and caboodle. And don't we, after all, want to know where these council members stand and their feelings on it? We're not going to talk about numbers or statistics or interest rates, but we are going to talk about how they feel about this proposal. Let's hear. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, oh, goody.
Yeah.
This is one of those, the board on top of the barrel where people are going like this. That's where we are, but you're there too. I would like to see this final part of Phase 3 build out. I mean, we've been talking about it. I've been talking about it longer than you have, obviously. And I think it completes the piece, and I kind of agree with him that if we're thinking about the whole corridor and the fact that we've bought some parcels and we want to see this keep going, I know the $600,000 loan thing is a risk factor, but there's also a risk factor in not helping this move forward at this point, and then that piece sits there. And so it's not so much to his benefit as to ours. I mean, he counts, but not like we do. I mean, he'll be able to say if we do it, that, wow, look what we did in Maplewood, that'll be good. Then the next time he answers that question, he can use us as an example. But
now we know where she stands, and we've posed the questions having to do with the duplicate liquor stores and how they might violate the current city ordinance about how close liquor stores can be. And in a couple shows from now, we'll have a report on the latest proposal from Sherman and Associates, so you'll find out what the city's plans are and Sherman's Associates' plans are with regard to that liquor store location. Up next is the opinion of the appointed mayor, Marley Abrams. Let's listen in.
Next. I have the benefit of having seen your company, Sherman and Associates, through Phase 1 and Phase 2. I've been to the grand opening and I think was there for the ribbon cutting in Phase 2 and have been very impressed with the quality of work and how that has really transformed Frost English. And my inclination, I especially like that idea of pledging the 25% or working out something, in that direction, because, this is city money, and so we are all very cautious and try to be very protective. Frost English is a very special area, and you have helped us with Phase 1 and Phase 2. And in terms of this final piece, we have always talked about it as the final phase, and I think that that is an important phase. I was just on a tour with the Rush Line today, and we're still looking at starting construction on that in 2024 and completing that in 2026, and that is going to be a really important center for our community, and I think that that retail space is going to be central to this area. And so my inclination is that I would be in support of moving forward with this, and of course, obviously, getting additional information and having staff review this, but I think that this is really central to that area so that we can keep this momentum, because I know that Frost English was pretty much on the back burner for many, many years, and we've got some momentum, and I don't want to lose that momentum. I think that that's really important. I think all of this is going to come together, and it will be very important for our community. So I'm, generally, I think that this is, I know it's a little unusual, but you have a track record, and certainly that makes me much more comfortable. We've got some history, and we've seen the projects and what you have been able to bring to our community.
Okay, well, that's a lot of happy talk. We've got momentum. It's a little unusual. She did hear the city attorney say that. But we've got momentum, and this retail, by the way, is going to be central to the BRT in Gladstone. We heard that, except we don't know what kind of retail it's going to be. How can it be central to the BRT if we don't even know what kind of retail we're talking about? Because they never asked. Is this going to be service-oriented businesses like nail shops? You know, you can get your nails done. What kind of retail?
It's going to be a bunch of coffee shops where they'll be busy from about 6 to 8 in the morning, from 5 to 8 in the morning, and it'll be dead the rest of the day until people come home, maybe around 5 or 6. And if these retail shops happen to serve food, it's a quick way to bring dinner home. But during the bulk of the day and on the weekends, you know, you can throw a stone and probably won't hit anyone.
So it comes back to the question, how is this retail going to be central to the success of the BRT?
Oh, I forgot. You're assuming people are using the bus.
Ah, there you go. That's right. Well, let's continue on.
I think
Just one comment. That's part of what made Legacy Village move like hotcakes, is because it was near retail. And so people were going, I can walk to this, to this, to this, to this, to this. And this is on a smaller scale, but it's the same theory. And now that that nice housing is there, we want to either retain some of the retail that's already there or attract something new, because it does work. It worked up there.
That was Kathleen Juneman talking about why the Legacy Village worked so well and that the units filled up like hotcakes because of the retail piece. Now, Mr. Waters, you lived up near Legacy Village. Tell us about what was that retail piece that's up by the Legacy Village?
Focusing around the Maplewood Mall.
Right, because the big retail up at the area around the Legacy Village area was the whole Maplewood Mall area and the other surrounding little malls around it. How does that compare to 3 little retail shops in the Gladstone neighborhood?
Well, it's just on a smaller scale. That's all. It's just on a smaller scale. There's an area over in the St. Anthony Village area, the Como area, St. Paul, where they have a little corner grocery store. I can't think of the name of it. It used to be Richards. It was Rogers, then it became Richards for the longest time. I can't think of what the name is now. You're going to have that in there. You're going to have a little post office. You're going to have a little restaurant. You're going to have, in this particular case, it's Frattallone's hardware that's there. You're going to have something like that, a little Ace Hardware store in there that has supplies. Or is it just, like I said, it's going to be that corner coffee shop that's going to be competing with Holiday down the street, where people will come in between, say, 5 and 8 in the morning, get their coffee, and then the rest of the day, the place is dead.
Yes. Well, let's continue.
2 buildings. The first one, the phase 1.
Let's
50
go
unit
to the
building
next clip.
Remains full, 98%.
Thank you. Councilmember Knutson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm looking at this, relatively new to the council. I've watched that neighborhood for 30-some years, and overjoyed with the improvements. So when I look at this as a real estate venture, I don't see it all that great. An 8,000 square foot retail building in the middle of nowhere isn't something a lot of speculators and others would do. However, when the whole idea of live work, now live shop is emerging. Neighborhoods or senior services are developed in CCRCs and all that. So I guess listening to my colleagues, I would certainly throw some support to completing a major project, and it seems like what you're offering is a fair deal, given that the stakes are really go in favor of the city.
Now that's Mr. Knutson. He's new to the council, as you heard. He's one of the appointed members to the council, and he has experience as being a developer. He was instrumental in developing the St. John's Hospital up by the mall. So he actually knows a thing or two about development. And yet, even though he has that experience, he is not asking any questions of the deal. He is simply just saying, you know, I'm going to defer to my colleagues here that this is the third phase, that it's got to get done. Well, okay, I guess it must be fine. But he's doing a disservice to the residents of Maplewood by not using his experience as a developer to vet the deal. Don't we expect that he would use his experience?
That's why I thought he was on there. We want to tap into that experience. Is this a good deal? Does this project have viability over the long term? So forth, so forth. What have you, I mean, granted, you may have developed the St. John's campus up there, up by the Maplewood Mall, but I'm sure if you worked for Health East Corporation doing stuff like that, or if he was a private developer, you know, what have you seen that works and what have you seen that hasn't worked?
Right, and talking about this trend of live and work together, close in the same proximity.
Live shop is what he was saying.
Yes. Well, then why isn't he asking, well, what kind of retail do you envision putting in here? Because as a developer, if he's looking to that trend as the trend that's going to support this development, that's the key question. What are you going to put in for the commercial part of the venture?
That's the question. That's the question I would ask.
Yes.
You know, 8,000 square feet is not a lot.
No.
It's not a lot compared to, you know, what a lot of people are used to in this day and age.
Yes. Well, let's continue and see what the next council person has to say.
Member Niblett.
Thank you, Mayor. When I was first got our packets, and the two things that I highlighted was the proposed 600,000 cash flow note and the need to be comfortable that the loan may not be repaid. On the one hand, I think, well, for me, and I think about me as a person, not as a city representative, but I think about $600,000, and it's like $600,000. And I know we have done bigger and are doing bigger projects right now. With that said, I also know what Phase 1 and Phase 2 looks like, and it's beautiful. I've seen the drawing of the proposed building. It looks beautiful. It looks like it would fit nicely within the area. But we need to be comfortable that the loan may not be repaid. And I have to trust my fellow councilmen, people, and mayor, who have been here with this project from the very beginning. I just wanted to say, we need to be comfortable that the loan may not be repaid. But my support for the project, absolutely.
Now that is Sylvia Neblett, who is also appointed to the council, same time as Mr. Knutson, has almost the same exact lines, it just said differently. I'm going to defer to my fellow council members who appointed me, that if they say this is good to go, it's good to go. Like I told you, Mr. Waters, they were issued the big red rubber stamps that say approved.
If it was me, I'd be saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this loan not being repaid, not with taxpayer money.
Right, and there's no issue, there should not be any issue being a dissenting voice.
No, there shouldn't be.
Because that actually is part of what makes a council work properly, is that if you have all the voices and people feel confident that they can speak for themselves and for the people they represent.
Correct.
If she feels uncomfortable, she should say she's uncomfortable and just stand up for that and say, yeah, you know, it sounds good, it's a beautiful building and all, but I am not comfortable with a $600,000 loan that may not be paid back.
And it's like, okay, if we lose this 600,000, what are we going to cut to make up for that difference?
Yes.
You know, rather than just saying we're going to raise taxes, what are you willing to cut to take this risk? And this is a huge risk.
Right. And that discussion is not being had.
Yeah, I know.
Well, let's continue.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think I concur too. It's, look, anytime there's a issue of a loan or lending happening, it is a bet. And so I think what banks try to do and what hopefully we'll try to do is to use information to reduce the risk and make the best bets possible, right? And Sherman's been a great partner for the city. You've had a track record. It's not like you just walked off of County Road B and asked for $600,000. That might be a different conversation. But, and I also appreciate your perspective of you'd like to maybe build in other cities and be able to borrow money there, and stiffing us on it would not necessarily help you and your ends either. So I think with the right magic that Mr. Beatty will put together as far as terms and things like that, I would be supportive. And I do think that we need to finish out that project. And it does feel, it feels like 80% done. And the last thing I'll say, though, is I think if there's ways we can help support some of the businesses nearby by potentially giving them some opportunities to move or somehow partner with them, and I'm thinking the bakery, I'm thinking Borchards, I'm thinking those that are longstanding Maplewood businesses that I'm not sure will necessarily have the stamina to see out the redevelopment process in that area. If there's ways we can help anchor them into that community, that would be icing on the cake for me.
So this is Councilmember Brian Smith. Several things. First of all, I love it how he's talking about that there is always that financial risk and that gamble that when, you're lending money that somebody may not pay it back. Well, keep in mind, he is the gentleman who a few years back filed bankruptcy. Who better to know that lending to him under those circumstances back then would have been a risk, because there were people and businesses that were unsecured who came away with less than what they gave Brian Smith when they lent him money. So there you go. Now, here's the other thing, is that we hear now that his big plan, he's telling Sherman and Associates, is that he wants to have them muscle the bakery owner, who, by the way, owns their own building, and muscle Borchards Market, which, by the way, owns their own building, to muscle them into going over to the new building and becoming tenants. Well, you see, that's exactly what those business owners don't want to do.
Well, my question is, I was listening to Councilmember Smith. What is the grand scheme, I'll just use that word, for that entire area? Because when you say this project is 80% completed, yeah, the 2 apartment buildings and this commercial building will make 100% complete. But what is your grand vision for that entire area? Because to me, that's what's going to be the success or failure of this project, not what is just at the northwest corner of Frost and English, but what is your grand vision for that entire area? Because I think back to when they built the fire station that supposedly the city wants to give to the Med Council to be a transit station for the BRT station. At that time, city manager Richard Fersman had said this new fire station is going to be the anchor for the new development for that entire area. That was 2001. This is 2019. And other than Sherman and Associates' 2 new buildings and his potential project on the southeast corner, what is your grand vision for that entire area? Because to me, that is what's going to make or break this project, not just putting an 8,000 square foot building on a plot of land that for all practical purposes has voucher housing, income verified housing, and a few market rate housing.
Right. And if you move the bakery and the other liquor store into that new building and Borchards into that new building, guess what? Now you will have empty, vacant buildings again, which goes to your question. What is your vision for that neighborhood?
And it's probably going to be more housing.
That's right. Well, let's play our very last clip as we round off our show.
No, I really appreciate all the feedback. Yeah, that is really helpful to kind of get a gauge on where all of you are at. And I sat down with Jeff before this just to have an introduction, and I think we'll have a lot more things to talk about after this meeting. So very much appreciate all the support. This council has always been supportive of the projects and the work that we've done, and it's been a very good partnership between the two groups here. And so hopefully on phase 3 is just another notch on the belt in that same partnership. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I assume you'll be chatting with Mr. Thompson and with Mr. Beatty.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Just another notch in the belt. Now, that, of course, I think is very telling about this whole story that we have in front of us, is that it's just a notch on somebody's belt. It isn't about what is best for the Gladstone neighborhood. It's just a notch in the belt. Notch in the belt of appointed Mayor Marley Abrams, so she can wander around town to all her meetings she goes to, saying how she did her part to support the BRT. A notch in the belt of Nora Slawick, who's moved on to be the chair of the Metropolitan Council, who can say that she was the facilitator of supporting the BRT. Just a notch in the belt of Melinda Coleman, who's now the city manager, where she can say, yes, this was my vision back in 2004, and look what I've done.
Look what I've accomplished in 15 years.
That's right. It's a notch in the belt of Sherman and Associates. They can say, oh yes, Maplewood was our partner, so that they can go and do the same scheme in other communities. And what I found ironic in all of this is that Councilmember Brian Smith said to the representative from Sherman and Associates, well, you've got a track record, so that's why we're not going to question what you can do. And yet previous to this, they also gave their nod of approval, their inkling, to the developer who, on the other corner of this intersection, is asking for tax increment financing, who doesn't have a track record. So whether they have a track record or not is actually irrelevant. So when Mr. Brian Smith talks about track records and that's why they don't question, he's being disingenuous, because the other guy asking for tax increment financing doesn't have a track record. Doesn't have a track record, and they're not questioning him either. There you go. Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Waters, for being here for our news program today.
Well, thank you. We had an inkling as to what is going on with this development.
Yes. And viewers, now you have an inkling as to what's going on.
No,
with
the
this
viewers have a bold vision of the inkling of what's going on with this development.
Yes. I like that. Well, thank you. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Then the proposed loan would be from some other city source. So $600,000 from some other city source. We thought as going through this process, well, would there be some TIF available? Could we pool to make this loan? But through this analysis of all these districts, there isn't any TIF available as a source to be able to make this loan. And one of the things we tell every city contemplating, and there are several that have contemplated and entered into loans like this, is that you need to be comfortable that you might not ever get it back. You need to be comfortable that you might not ever get it back.
Loans like this would be risky, and so you'd have to be comfortable that you might not see your money. It's kind of out of the ordinary in terms of the use of tax increment.